people don't know about the land between the lakes. Now, the land between the lakes is this area on the border of Kentucky and Tennessee. And basically, at the time, there were two rivers that formed this piece of land in between. And apparently in the 60s, 70s sometime, they dammed it off and created what is now Lake Kentucky and Barkley Lake. And in between is this stretch of land that's become like this tourist destination where millions of people go every year to camp. Now, there are so many different legends and lore because apparently when they had dammed the lakes, they flooded entire towns, and some of these towns had cemeteries, and so a lot of these cemeteries are completely underwater, under the lake. And also, if you hike in this area where the land is, there are over like 270 cemeteries. Now, this is a story I heard out of the land of the lakes and how creepy this place is. So this guy said that him and his family went down for the 4th of July to stay at this cabin right next to Lake Kentucky. And he said, it was about midday. Him and his family were all outside right next to the lake. His sons were fishing, and he was just sitting there grilling out. Well, he said all of a sudden he hears a man's voice yelling, "Help me." And he said it sounded like it was coming from like the lake. And he's looking around, he doesn't see anyone, but he can vividly hear, like, "Help me, help me, help me." And so he gets his wife and he's like, "Do you hear that?" And she hears it. And they can't figure out like where this is coming from. And he's like, "Well, there's a bunch of people here, for 4th of July. Maybe it's someone camping nearby." So eventually, after they keep hearing this, he calls the sheriff. Sheriff comes out. He hears it. And he's confused because he's like, it's coming from the lake, but where is it coming from? Like, who is out there saying, "Help me"? So he goes around and, goes to different campsites and cabins. No one is like, "Yeah, we're not yelling for help. Like, we don't need help." And he seems like very confused and stuff. Later that night, they're all in their cabin sleeping. And he said sometime in the middle of the night, they start hearing a banging at the door. And someone's like banging frantically at the front door of this cabin. And he said he could hear that same man's voice. And it was like yelling, "Help me, help me." So he's like, hold on. Like, I'm coming. He runs to the front door of the cabin. He opens it up. And he said it was just completely quiet outside. There was no one. And he said later on he talked to some locals and they said, yeah, and like this stuff happens all the time. There have been, hundreds of people who drowned in this lake. And he said like every year so many people drowned or they disappear and they're never seen from again. One of the other legends about this area is something they call the LBL Beast, or the beast of the land between the lakes. And this thing is similar to the Dogman up in Michigan, right? And apparently in the 80s, there was a whole family that was like massacred. And, they tried to cover it up and stuff. Soldiers came from Fort Campbell. And a lot of people in the area, they say, yeah, they're like, there is something in this woods. We don't go out at night. So this is another story I heard about this man and his family. They go out camping in this area, and they actually stayed in a cabin. And I believe it was near Lake Kentucky. And he said, at night they decided to go for like a nice hike because it was really nice outside. So they started hiking down this trail and they stumbled upon like a really old cemetery. And he said during the day they had seen it, but now at night it looked really creepy because it was kind of illuminated by the moonlight. And he said all of a sudden they seen something like moving by one of the stones. And he said that's when he noticed there was like dirt sort of flying up in the air. And he said as they got a little closer, there was something digging out like one of these graves. And he said all of a sudden this thing just stood up out of the hole. And he said it looked like a man, but a dog. And it had these bright red eyes. And apparently, he said it let off this loud howl. And so he said him and his family, they took off running as fast as they can. They get back to the cabin and they lock the doors. And he said all night long, they could hear this thing running around the house, making howls, like going up on the porch, tapping on the window. And they said whatever it was stalked them all night. And the next morning they packed up and left. So what do you think? Have you heard any stories from the land of the lakes?